Welcome and thank you for joining us. I don't know about you, but I was digging that music. I'm Argyle Wade. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, and I'll be moderating today's gathering. We're pleased to offer closed captioning in sign language in the links below this video. Thanks again to the McBurney Center for taking care of that for us. Let's begin first, though, by acknowledging the land that UW-Madison inhabits. This is the ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk Nation, one of the 12 First Nations of Wisconsin. We invite you to learn about the indigenous communities that have called this land home since time immemorial. By acknowledging our past, we're able to move forward to a shared future. These truths are part of the Wisconsin experience, and we honor them today. Today's meeting is going to cover several different topics. First, we're going to address public health and the evolving guidelines and some of the questions that are coming with that we're hearing from different staff. We're also going to follow that with specifics on what those changes mean for our work in student affairs, the environment that we're going to have this fall, followed by an open question and answer. We want you to submit questions throughout the meeting using the YouTube chat. And today's forum is going to be archived for later viewing. Now, joining me today are Lori Reeser, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Jake Baggett, Associate Vice Chancellor for Health and Wellbeing and Executive Director of University Health Services, Mark Guthier, Associate Vice Chancellor for Leadership and Engagement and Director of the Wisconsin Union, Gabe Javier, Associate Vice Chancellor for Identity and Inclusion, Christina Olstead, Dean of Students, and Carol Griggs, Director of Operations for University Health Services. Now, I'll turn it over to Dr. Reeser.
Thanks, Argyle. Hey, everyone. It's so great to be with you today. First, I want to start with my appreciation for every student affairs staff member's efforts this past year. Each of you has shown great dedication to supporting our students, their families, and our community. And we don't have enough time to acknowledge every single effort, but I do want to just give a couple shout outs to some significant groups. All the staff who've been on campus continuously during the pandemic, feeding our essential workers and keeping our spaces clean and safe for everyone. The many healthcare staff who stood up the testing sites, handled health-related questions, provided contact tracing, then pivoted to bring vaccines to campus and to the larger community. Those of you who served as Badger Wellness Ambassadors or who took on alternative responsibilities over the last year to address new challenges. To our staff who supported our underrepresented students while managing your own trauma from the national tragedies and local bias incidents that sadly continue to happen. To those responsible for the many creative programs, thank you for your commitment to reimagining and delivering leadership development, community building, diversity, inclusion, and social justice education in a largely virtual environment. Each one of you who took in reports or questions on health and safety, conduct, accommodations, bias, and so much more, sometimes fielding long conversations from students or maybe some crabby parents. You did so with compassion, patience, and empathy. And our International Student Services team, sorry, my tongue's getting all twisted up today. They are moving to the International Division on July 1st. You have been a rock of support for our international students, and that's been evident this past year more than any other. And while I'm so sad that you are leaving student affairs, I'm also hopeful and positive and excited about the strong student-centered culture you have grown, then to see that expand even further. Of course, there are many individual groups over the past year, but the bottom line is you were incredible. And thank you so much for everything you've done. It's hard to believe that December 2019 was the last time that a lot of us were able to meet together in person. That was at the Student Affairs Winter Celebration at the Memorial Union. Life changed quickly just a few months later. Now, with Dane County leading the state in vaccination numbers, thanks in no small part to your amazing work, in COVID positive rates, the lowest they've been in many months, it's time to begin making that transition to our new normal. So to help us move forward, it's important to have clarity on our public health and environment as it stands right now. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to our public health superheroes, Jake and Carol.
Thanks, Dr. Reeser. While Carol and I are here to kind of speak on behalf of the public health picture, we both want to acknowledge that really there's a number of folks behind the scenes at UHS and on the front lines doing the work that's led to a lot of this. Folks, like Dr. Kelly, Amanda Jovog, and many others that have been contributing to all this work. And with all the effort, all the folks that Lori mentioned and folks across campus, we have really climbed this COVID mountain. And we're headed down on the other side of that, and where things are more largely under control. So it's time for us to kind of talk about what's the data telling us, what are the things that we need that we can start to think about now, and then what are the things that we can individually do to kind of help continue to prevent COVID from becoming a larger issue. So we established an enormous testing strategy last year that really proved very effective in understanding where COVID showed up, and then allowed us to move in and address what are the steps that we need to put in place. And while we had a kind of a difficult challenge, in the early part of the fall semester, we quickly got that under control and maintained that through public health protocols throughout the fall. And all this, and then of course we ratcheted that up even to a more significant effort in the spring with the Safer Badger app and the testing that went along to support that. And the end result of that was a very different experience. The fall started off rough. We got things under control. We got through the rest of the semester. The spring, the numbers are very, very different. But all of this effort was really around a strategy to kind of hold off the spread of COVID and the impact on our lives and on our campus until a vaccination strategy, a vaccination was available. And so that was a bridge strategy, and it worked. And as Dr. Reeser mentioned, the cases are at an all-time low. I think today's U.S. data is like 15,000 cases. That's the lowest it's been since sometime in March at the beginning of the pandemic. The Dane County data and here on campus the cases are almost non-existent. And many times we go with no positive cases at all and still have fairly significant testing going on. So all of those factors are really leading us to the place that we're at now, where things are different and it's changing quickly, and it's changing almost every day. New understanding, new knowledge comes around that's informing the work that we're doing. The Alliance Center, if you aren't aware of that because of the changing demands both for testing and vaccination, is getting ready to close, I think, next week. So again, those are all indicators that things are largely under control here, and we're headed in the right direction. But we're not all moving at the same pace, and we all have to kind of understand that both on an institutional, community, and on an individual level. And it's something that we all have to adjust to. We're doing it at different paces. Admittedly, I was I spent a few days last week visiting some family in Illinois. I came back, and right after the public health orders changed here in Dane County, I knew all that was happening, but I have to admit, I stopped by Farm and Fleet to go in and pick up some things, automatically grabbed my face mask, walked towards the door, and then realized I don't actually have to wear that anymore because I'm vaccinated. But I paused and I had to think about that, and I realized it even gave me a pause with that. So I know that some folks who aren't as comfortable with that as I am are going to take their own time to kind of work through that. But it's a mind shift that we're all going through that we want to spend some time talking about today. I'm going to let Carol kind of pick it up here and share some of her thoughts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jake. And thank you for everyone that's joining today. Just piggybacking on something that Jake just said. So the mindset shift that's needed is something that we intentionally have to focus on really for the next month, for the next 2 months, for the next 3 months. It's going to take us time to really shift the way that we view COVID. But even more importantly, it's going to take us time to shift how we view our reality. For the last year, while we've been in the pandemic, we have been conditioned to consider everything that we need to do to protect ourselves from COVID. That's included social distancing and wearing a mask and hand sanitation, and all of these things that historically we here in the United States of America haven't necessarily taken on as kind of standard protocol. These have always been things that have existed in the fabric of our existence, but they weren't necessarily popularized here in the US. Wearing masks and all of that, that was something that you see if you go to other countries. They have utilized those to help as far as keeping folks safe and healthy. But they've just been something that people are just more familiar with and more comfortable with because it wasn't necessarily a new thing in the same way. But for the last year here in the United States of America, public health organizations and public health recommendation has directly contributed to institutional policy. There have been things that we have had to do to reduce transmission of COVID. And we had to do that because we had no other tool in our back pocket to protect us. And so we had surveillance testing, we had symptomatic testing, we had social distancing mandates where you have dots on the floor that you have to step on. We had mask mandates so that folks could protect themselves and protect others around them. These were all things that we did because, again, we had no other strategy. Thankfully, in January of this year, we did have another strategy that came online. We had vaccines. The great benefit in a vaccine is that you have the opportunity to participate in your own protection, right? You have the opportunity to make a choice to protect yourself. In essence, you're giving your body a kick boost of antibodies to help fight off a specific virus, which is exactly what we want folks to do. We want folks to make that decision to get vaccinated. So now that we have a vaccine that's come online, it's really difficult for people to make that mental shift since we have spent the last year of our reality being conditioned in such a way where we really fear COVID and we're afraid of COVID, or we have these kind of things that we have to do to protect ourselves against COVID. It's really difficult shifting to this new paradigm where we live in a reality where COVID, SARS-CoV-2 exists and we coexist with it. Now, I'm not saying that in a sense of us not considering that this is a virus. It is a virus. It's a virus that's going to exist in the fabric of our existence. It's going to be there, and it's one virus among millions of viruses that's just going to be there in the environment. But since we have a vaccine that we can actually utilize to protect us, we can't think about COVID in the exact same way. And that's really for people that are vaccinated. For people that are unvaccinated, the reality is they still need to encourage not only people around them that are unvaccinated, but they also need to follow public health protocols themselves. And the reason that they need to do that is because they've made a choice to not be vaccinated, or there are other situations and circumstances that impact their ability to get vaccinated. Similar to a standard flu season, if a person can't get a vaccine, what are some of the things that they need to do during a standard flu season to protect themselves? Wearing masks work. This year, the year that we just finished, that was probably the lowest flu season that a lot of folks have experienced in a really long time. Part of that is because we had all of these protocols in place to protect ourselves. But as we transition along in reality, a reality that's inevitably coming, we have to think about what it means to live in an environment where SARS-CoV-2 exists and we exist along with it. Vaccines is what we need to protect ourselves. But if for whatever reason we're not vaccinated, what do we do in that reality? And public health professionals would recommend you do what you need to do to protect yourself. You continue to wear your mask, continue to stay away from people that are sick, continue to do some of the same things that you would do during a standard upper respiratory viral season to ensure that you are safe. And this is kind of the reality that we're progressing on towards. We have to think about what it means to actually live in a world where COVID exists and we coexist with it, just like all of the other viruses that exist. And that is going to take some intentional conversations. People aren't going to necessarily feel comfortable with it yet. And the primary tool that they have is this vaccine. They can protect themselves. And if they did get their vaccine, then it's somewhat like having a hedge of protection around them, right? You are actually protected against the virus. The people that we're more concerned about at that, because those are the ones that are going to be at risk. And so, example, if you are a vaccinated person, you work in a building, and the building has vaccinated and unvaccinated people, and there is no mask mandate on that building. There are no dots on the floor. What is your level of concern? The answer is that it should actually be really low if you're vaccinated. It really is like returning back to this kind of pre-pandemic existence. Again, there's just one more virus in the environment that we're aware of now. And so that's the mindset shift that we have to make. As a vaccinated person, you really are protected. And for those that are unvaccinated, those folks need to continue to do the same things that we've been saying for the last year, the same things that really have always existed. Protect yourself from viruses. And you just need to continue to do that as we move forward, honestly. And that's not just protecting you from COVID, that's protecting you from a lot of different viruses. And so getting to the point where we can live in an environment where this virus exists, that reality is coming very quickly. It's coming really soon. And so we need, not only for ourselves, to make that mental shift, but we need to start helping other people around us make that mental shift. And I will say, with that mental shift, it's really important to understand that not everyone's going to get to the same place at the same time. It's going to take time for people to make that mental shift. And so as you interact in the environment, as you interact around other people, it's going to be really important for you to think about people's personal space. Give them space so that they can get acclimated to what this new reality means. Give them time to kind of really feel through this, living within this reality that we have to live in. It doesn't necessarily mean that there are going to be a lot of ways that we can lessen the impact of how that transition feels, but we can at least be cognizant that there are other people that might be progressing along in that reality at a different pace. It doesn't mean that people can't come, that they'll be able to not come to work, right? It doesn't mean that the world is going to shut down again. That's not what it means. But what it does mean is that we just want to be aware. We want to have professional courtesy when we're around other people, knowing that we're all kind of in this shift together. I think those are the primary things that I would at least want to share about just where we are in the state of the pandemic. I think at this point we can probably hand it back over to Argyle. And thank you again to everyone for being here today.
Well, thanks, Jake and Carol. Every time I hear both of y'all talk, it just reminds me how lucky we are to have you on campus, how lucky we are that you're connected to the national discussion that's going on in this. And I know it just helps me, take a big, deep breath and, kind of breathe out. So I hope the people who are with us today also, feel that and are, kind of encouraged by what you're saying. I want to remind people that you can put questions and comments in the chat so that we can try to be responsive to those as we walk through the rest of our conversation here. Carol, I did want to throw one question to you that I've heard from some people around campus, and maybe we can kind of discuss this one real quickly. You really emphasize people being vaccinated, and that's important. We know that there's some people that are still kind of uncomfortable being around other people who are not vaccinated, who maybe not be masking, and it could be they have other situations in their household, like they might have health concerns. They may have a family member who has a health concern, or maybe they have a young child who's too young to get vaccinated. What's your advice for a person who has these concerns but yet needs to be on site to work?
Yeah, my primary recommendation for that person would be, one, get vaccinated yourself if you haven't already done that. That is the first step towards protecting your family. And the second thing is that if you did get vaccinated, feel confident in the vaccine. The vaccine offers a very high level of protection. The efficacy rate on all the vaccines is extraordinarily high. And so what that means is that you are less likely to actually contract and transmit COVID to other folks that you are around. And so the concern, even though it's still there, I know, again, we've been socialized and trained to really think about protecting other people. That's something that society has taught us for the last year. But you really need to rest in the confidence of the vaccine. If you got vaccinated, you are actually doing everything you possibly can to protect your family. And so even if you're out and about and you're around other people, vaccinated and unvaccinated, again, you have this hedge of protection around yourself. And so that actually is less risk for your family.
And then if I have a specific health concern of my own, who do I talk to try to address that issue in the workplace?
Yep, absolutely. You should contact your DDR, your divisional disability representative. I think that I got that right. Maybe I got that right. We're going to hope I got it right. But that's actually the person that you reach out to, because they would be able to help you with your specific situation.
Okay. And is it appropriate for me to ask somebody about their vaccination status, or is that not the way we're approaching it nowadays?
Yeah, no, here at UW-Madison, we are not approaching it that way. There's a lot of complexity to asking someone about their vaccination status. As we kind of started this conversation earlier and we talked about that mindset shift that's needed, a lot of people are still grappling with what it means for other people to have that information. And so we really don't want to put employees in that situation. We don't really want to put anyone in that situation at present. And so the best thing that you can do is know your own status and act accordingly. And again, professional courtesy, be cognizant of people that are around you. Try your best not to get into their personal space unless, the two of you agree that you're okay with being in one another's personal space. Just give people time to kind of make that mental shift that's needed to exist in a reality where COVID exists.
All right, good thoughts. Thanks to both of you again. We're going to talk more about this. So again, please put your questions and your comments in the chat. We'll get to as much as we can today. We're going to turn now, though, to Dr. Reeser for the second part of our conversation.
Great, thanks everybody. And again, a huge thank you to Jake and Carol for all your leadership, and you and your teams are really the sheroes and heroes of this past year. So thank you for your continued leadership and expertise. As Carol mentioned, we really have all experienced loss and hardship due to the pandemic, and it's really important to acknowledge that. I know the personal loss that I experienced with my own family, whether it was from illness or even death due to COVID, the difficult experience my high school student had in virtual school, or many other challenges. And for others living with the trauma of the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and sadly other people too, I want to acknowledge how hard this year has been for all of us. And we really, really must take the time to heal and to rest. And we need to respect that we're all going to handle the next round of change differently. I hope that you are doing what you need to do to take care of yourself. And those are constant reminders that we all need, is to make sure we're taking the time to heal and to take care of ourselves. So while I know the transition of the fall semester really feels scary to some, it's really also exciting for other people. So it's important to celebrate the ways life's changed and find ways to adapt to those changes so that we can all move forward. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn our attention and direction that we're heading about staffing for this fall. The campus goal is really to begin a transition process that begins with bringing all employees who've been working remotely back to campus by August 1st. Some are already returning earlier. It's really kind of fun in Bascom. It feels like every day there's a few more doors open, a few more people around, and we're just all so excited to see each other in full. Somebody said to me, "You're in three-dimensional. I can see you from head to toe. I can see your full face." It's just been really, really nice. But at the same point, I also know that that's hard and scary for a lot of people. But as you heard from Jake and Carol, the success of the vaccination is the reason we're able to be back at this point. It's helped us emerge from this pandemic and helped us to reunite on campus. If you've not uploaded your documentation for your vaccination into My UHS, please do so. And there's information for how to do that on the COVID response website. But this fall, think about it, we're going to be back to our vibrant, beautiful residential campus. 45,000 plus students living on campus, taking classes, working with us. And that means that a lot of the jobs that were virtual this year need to be back on campus, so we can teach students in person, we can serve our students with our resources, and we can conduct research in our facilities. As you know, our work is highly, highly student-centered. And yes, we've proven that we can do a lot virtually, but if our students are going to be here in person, we need to be here as well. They want and need our connections, the relationships, and the support that we know and believe is most effective when we're in person. I recognize that a substantial share of campus work has adapted to a remote environment over the past year, and I am grateful for the hard work that everybody's done. And I want to acknowledge that we've had employees who never left campus and who worked on campus through the most difficult and scariest part of this pandemic. And I'm so grateful to them as well. So workplace flexibility is important, and remote work, whether it's either part-time or full-time, is a form of flexibility. So within the guidelines of the university's new remote work policy, in student affairs, our cabinet leaders, in conjunction with their directors, will be deciding what the fall is going to look like and the decisions on the different work levels for everybody.
All right. Well, thanks, Lori, for setting the stage for this next second part of our discussion. And we're going to now want to bring back the rest of the team who's been with us today so we can talk about some of the questions that we're hearing from staff around student affairs. And I'm just going to start off with Jake, if you don't mind. I know a question that's come up is Carol mentioned that, it's not appropriate really at this point, not best practice to ask someone about their vaccination status, but some people may not want to ask, but might want to be told by somebody else, can my supervisor tell me about the vaccination status of the people that I work with? Or, what if I have to share an office with someone and I don't know if they're vaccinated? Any advice for how to handle either knowledge of vaccination status or sharing a workspace?
Sure, and we all want to, understand, where different folks are at. One thing I think I probably should have mentioned earlier is that we already know, because of the information people have already shared with us, that the large proportion of our campus is already fully vaccinated, somewhere north of 70%. And I think it's even higher than that for most units within student affairs. So we know that people are taking those steps. We also know there are folks who haven't just shared that information with us yet by uploading it into my UHS. So just reiterate Lori's suggestion that you go ahead and do that if you haven't already. But we don't want to set up the situation where we feel compelled to disclose that to individuals, or we shouldn't be asking people and insist on them sharing that with us. I mean, conversations between individuals, people may volunteer to share that information with you, and that's certainly appropriate. I'm more than comfortable sharing with other folks, but that doesn't mean that everybody else has that same level of comfort. You may want to talk about your own vaccination decision and share that, and what freedoms or flexibilities that has brought to you as you navigate your life. But those are some of my thoughts. We want to respect people's privacy. We also want to encourage them to get vaccinated. And again, don't assume just because they're wearing a face mask that they haven't been vaccinated. People may still continue to do that. So we just want to respect individual decisions around decisions like that.
So Jake, for those staff who do have to work in those shared workspaces, do you think it's okay for people to break the ice a little bit that with somebody they're sitting next to, maybe in an office, if they feel like they want to go there? Is that okay to bring it up in a respectful way?
I think it's perfectly reasonable. I mean, people are going to be familiar with each other. This may be the first time they've worked together for a while. And if you're comfortable with it, maybe you start that conversation. Hey, I've been vaccinated, and then see where that conversation naturally goes. But please remember that not everybody's going to want to share that information with you, and respect that decision. The most important thing is if you've been vaccinated, you've taken the most important step to protecting yourself and those around you.
Great, thanks, Jake. So Christina, here's one that I'll pitch to you is we know that there are going to be some people for different reasons that do not choose to become vaccinated. We also know that there's not the requirement now to wear a mask. I think some people are asking, like, how will mask, there's still, if you're not vaccinated, you're expected to wear a mask, but we won't have the ability to know who those people are. How are we going to be enforcing masking? And can a person ask other people to mask, or can a department require people to mask in their space?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question, Argyle. So we are not checking vaccination status as a campus, and we are not enforcing masking as a campus either. With that said, we will be continuing to educate our community about how mask wearing allows the unvaccinated individual to protect themselves from serious illness. And as someone who is, kind of wondering around that, or who is vaccinated, remember, Jake and Carol shared that the vaccination protects you and your ability to contract or spread the virus. So, I understand that this is a concern, but at this point, we are not checking vaccination status or enforcing masking. Now, the second part of that question, you had asked, can we require people to wear a mask? No, we cannot require everyone wears a mask unless it's a clinical or healthcare setting. However, wearing a mask in any setting can be encouraged. In addition, anyone, regardless of vaccination status, can continue to wear a mask indoors or outdoors. So one example, typically when I come into the office, I will still wear a mask when I come into the office. But then when I'm in the office, I will take my mask off, open the door, and then I've started to be in meetings without my mask on as well. And it feels a little weird at first, but it does take some time, and it's kind of adjusting to our situation as it presents itself. But knowing that the vaccination really protects you, and that you can still choose to wear a mask.
Yeah, I know when I have been on campus or even out in the community, there's some times where I've walked in and some people wear a mask and some people aren't. And I'm like, oh man, did I make a mistake here? And I'm not sure. So I've got one in my pocket, but maybe I left it in the office. And it's going to be a little weird and awkward at times. We have to give each other some space. So I appreciate you giving us that example of how you handle it, coming into the workplace. This is just part of the transition. So it's okay if you don't do it exactly perfect. I do want to remind you that while we're trying to cover questions that we're hearing from people, we want to also make sure that the people who are with us today really get the issues and concerns that they have out on the table. So feel free to put something in the chat. We'll be happy to try to address that as we kind of move through this. So keep that coming if you have something on your mind. Gabe, how about let's turn to you if it's okay. We do know that there are some people that might, again, not choose to be vaccinated, but they may also, disclose that they're also choosing not to wear a mask. Can you talk through what advice you have for a staff member if that situation happens? What action should they take? And I'll have a follow-up, I think, after that, but let's start there.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a great question. We know that vaccination is a personal choice, as Jake and Carol talked about. So one of the first things you can do is ask them to put on a mask. And if they don't comply at that point, you can consult with your supervisor about the best way to manage the situation. The second part of the question around physical distancing, for now, the indoor physical distancing requirement remains at least 6 feet. Regardless of vaccination status. Outdoors, individuals who are not vaccinated should maintain 6 feet physical distance, and if physical distancing is not possible, wear a face covering. The campus is evaluating if a distance requirement will be necessary for the fall semester, so make sure to keep informed because things continue to change.
Okay, that's great to know. So right now, even though people can choose to how they handle the mask situation, and they're vaccinated, they don't have to wear a mask. If they're unvaccinated, we're expecting to, but we're not checking. That distance requirement is still in place, is what I'm hearing from you.
That's right.
But it will likely change before the fall semester kicks off.
Lots of things could change into the fall semester.
That's the only guarantee, right? Is that we will be shooting this video again in a month. Okay, so that's good to know. So again, I think what you're saying is, there's going to be some continual evolution of this, and that's the information you will have to continue to be passing to the staff. So thanks for that. Lori, let's jump back to you if it's okay. I know you kind of referenced this a little bit in your opening remarks, a little bit about employees feeling like maybe they are working just as effectively remotely as they are in person. What about if an employee feels that that's the situation they are in, and how do we strike the balance between the needs of meeting the important needs of students and meeting those needs of employees?
Yeah, I really appreciate the tension that exists on that issue, because obviously we really are trying to do our best to honor both. But the reality is that over 92% of our classes are going to be back in person next fall. maybe about 4% hybrid, maybe about 4% online. That's exactly where we were before the pandemic started. So again, while we're trying to learn and experience some of the positive things that came from the pandemic in terms of work, we really want to get back into the same community experience that happens on campus. So we need people to come back to work in person and to help create that sense of community on campus. We're really, really committed to our residential in-person experience for our students. While we know the online experience worked for many folks, and it is certainly what we need to do, what we heard so much from our students, and honestly, even our faculty and staff, is how much it meant to be on campus and how much they missed all the things that happened as a result of being on campus. I was listening to an NPR story the other day about returning or switching from remote work to in-person. And one of the ways that speaker talked about it was that the serendipity of being on in-person work, the serendipity of the conversations where you pop over and say, hey, what do you think about this idea? Or a meeting just happened and you want to kind of process all of that. Those are difficult things to happen in the virtual space. So we really want to try to bring our employees back. But yet, there are some opportunities for some workplace flexibility and remote work as well.
Sure. We just had one of those moments right before the web chat started where I saw a book on your bookshelf and I said, hey, I've been looking for that book. Can I borrow it? And, that wouldn't have happened, 12 months ago or 6 months ago. I would have been buying that book and having it shipped to me or getting it from the library. So I absolutely appreciate what you're saying there. Now, I think there's two terms that I hear that are sometimes confusing for people. There's a term that's been thrown out about workplace flexibility. And then there's this other term called remote work. And I know they're very different. So would you mind, Lori, just spending a moment talking about the difference between workplace flexibility and what remote work is?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really good question. So workplace flexibility is when we're providing options and occasional opportunities for employees to work off-site at different times. We've actually always had this option available to us, but we probably weren't as sophisticated with it or didn't have the technology or maybe weren't set up as much at home. That's still going to continue to be an option for our employees. Remote work is a more formalized agreement for regular, recurring, and planned off-site work. And that's the space where not every job is going to be able to take advantage of those options because we really are wanting and needing everybody to be back on site. So the most important thing is to keep your lines of communication open with your supervisor, to be understanding that you may not be the only staff member to making that request. We know and hope that we're going to think more creatively about offering some hybrid services to our students because we do know that some of our students would rather just get on a screen and have a quick conversation with somebody as opposed to getting up and coming on campus. So those are all viable options to have some flexibility. And again, those are conversations that we need to have happen with our especially between the employees and their supervisors.
All right, thanks for that. Mark, let's get you involved here. I know that now that Dr. Reeser has talked about what remote work is, there's probably a lingering question that people are having about what's the process for discussing the ability to work remotely and who's going to make that decision. And maybe you could illuminate a little bit like what that's going to look like across your area and maybe how it might apply to student affairs.
Sure, happy to, Argyle. So all of the areas in student affairs, the theme areas, as well as the cabinet as a group of leaders has been talking about this for the last few months. So we knew that the campus was creating its remote work and workplace flexibility policy, and we were having these discussions to begin to get ready for this. So those conversations will conclude here in the next couple weeks now that the policy is out. And each of the four theme areas will announce within their theme areas kind of their timeline for making decisions and the process that they'd like to use in their individual theme areas. So you should hear from your AVC or your dean about that kind of process and timeline here in the next couple of weeks. I can let you know that in all instances, the ability to work remotely will begin with a request from the employee. So the employee doesn't request work remotely, we don't even start the process. So there'll be an employee request. We believe there'll be a standard form for that comes out from the Office of Human Resources. We're still waiting to see that. And then that will trigger the process. And so we also know that there'll be at least a couple levels of approval. Supervisors of every employee that requests remote work will have to agree to it. And then if there's a department head above the supervisor, they'll need to agree to it. And then finally, the final decision will rest with the AVC or the dean in the area. All of us, when we make these final decisions, will be taking 6 or 7 criteria into consideration, weighing all of them. So not any one criteria will have the ability to be the sole decision-making piece of information. So, and these are outlined in the campus remote work policy, but they're things like the actual job responsibilities. Can they be performed remotely or not? The effect of granting remote work on the effectiveness of the overall operating unit. The needs and preferences of the employee will be taken into consideration, but also the employee's performance will be taken into consideration. Whether there'll be any special equipment needs needed. What's the adverse impact on the rest of the employees in the work unit if a remote work agreement is agreed to? And finally, the impact on office space. So those 6 or 7 criteria will be the types of things that those of us who approve these final requests will be taking into consideration.
All right, so it sounds like very soon then you in your thematic area, you'll be hearing from one of your cabinet members that will be able to say, here's the process we're gonna run, here's how you get this conversation started. And what I hear you saying, Mark, is then those factors are how they kind of will be evaluating and discussing kind of what makes sense and what doesn't make sense going forward.
Correct. So I think we'll all be doing this roughly from late June to mid-July, somewhere in there. Because the policy goes in effect August 1st, obviously. So sometime in the next couple of weeks, almost all the student affairs will be in this process, and we'll probably all be wrapping it up by mid-July or so, I would guess. So.
All right, so if you're listening to this right now and watching this and you don't feel like those conversations are happening or you're not understanding the process, feel free to reach out to your supervisor or your department director to make sure that, talk to them because they'll be fully engaged in this process as well. Thanks for that, Mark. Jake, let's jump back to something because I think there may be a little lack of clarity on something or maybe even some competing information that's potentially out there. We talked about the mask enforcement and we said that for unvaccinated staff, we will not be enforcing a masking requirement. We're expecting to wear a mask, but we don't enforce that. There's an FAQ out there that talks about unvaccinated staff being, kind of, if that happens, they could have to talk to human resources. Can you give us some clarification on kind of what's the process forward when a staff member isn't vaccinated and choosing not to wear a mask?
Sure, and things have changed and continue to evolve. I want to remind us that the Dane County Public Health orders discontinued last week, and one of the reasons, which included a masking requirement, and the reason that ended was that the prevalence was so very, very low that the spread really was almost non-existent in the number of cases. And of course, the campus followed suit with its own. The chancellor canceled the mask order that has been in place for most of this pandemic period. And so there's no longer a policy requirement around that. There are still recommendations from CDC and DHS that we should, if you're unvaccinated, that you should wear a face mask. Now, if somebody chooses not to do that and they disclose that, I think the suggestion is that there be a conversation with them or with their supervisor to help them understand the issues around that. But in terms of a policy statement, there's not a policy requirement. There's still recommendations, and that's really to protect the people who are unvaccinated. The folks, if I were not vaccinated and I chose not to wear a mask, I'm really putting myself at risk. More than that, the people around me who are vaccinated would not be at risk. So the thing that we can do individually is consider taking the vaccination to protect those around us and ourselves. those will be challenging conversations if they occur.
I see. So it sounds like the involvement of human resources could just be that they're helping to mediate and work through these conversations, not necessarily from a disciplinary standpoint. But I appreciate the question that has come in, because we probably need to take another look at what's out there in our FAQs. These are written over weeks and months' time, and it's always good to go back and refresh them and say, is that still exactly the way we're thinking about it? So thanks for clearing that up, Jake. And I want to say thanks to the people that are putting these questions in the chat. I mean, this is exactly why we're doing this, is to try to find out what's on your mind, what's confusing, how do we provide some clarity. So keep those coming. We're going to get through as many as we can today. So this one, I think it'll be like an all play. Okay, so maybe Gabe, Christina, Mark. There's going to be international students who cannot come back to campus immediately at the start of the semester because of visa issues or travel challenges. We still have some instructional contingencies, but what about virtual engagement like community building and programming for those students who can't make it here in person at the start of the semester? Does anybody have any sense of how your areas might be thinking about that? And I'll just throw it open and jump in.
I can jump in and take my first shot at this all play. So yeah, we do know that for international students who are unable to potentially get to campus at the start of the academic year, or for students who may be a little bit more hesitant to engage in larger groups, we are exploring opportunities for virtual environments and also in-person environments as well to build community and connection to UW-Madison. So that's front of mind for our programmers. Obviously, we know the landscape has shifted significantly within the last few weeks. And there is a work group that is being chaired by Mark Kippers and Claudia Guzman, focused on the second year experience and engaging our second year students. And they're also looking at what are some in-person opportunities and what are some virtual opportunities to build community as well. So yes, this is front of mind. Thank you so much for that question.
Others? Gabe, Mark, Jake?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I know in the chat that the Gender and Sexuality Campus Center mentioned their Discord server, which is a very popular way for people to be engaged virtually. Also, the GSCC, the large conference that's coming up in October, will include virtual tracks. So at least in those two places, we know that there's already virtual programming ready to go in the fall.
And then there's some opportunities also in the leadership and engagement area. ALPS will continue its virtual programming for community building. We'll have those as options. CFLY will be doing both. We'll be doing a virtual student org fair as well as an in-person student org fair this fall. I know the union installed streaming capabilities in both buildings, and so we'll continue to be able to offer streaming of live programming at the same time, so that both virtual audiences and in-person audiences can avail themselves of the programming. So for student organizations that would like to offer that to their virtual audience, they just need to make arrangements and be in spaces at the unions that have the streaming capabilities. And then I know some of our clubs actually and committees actually thrived on campus during this, particularly the gaming clubs, right? So I can't imagine that whole experience is going to go in person anytime soon. That'll probably stay online and virtual. So there will still be student organizations and opportunities to engage virtually. So.
And Jake, Recwell, any sense about, I know they did a huge amount of virtual programming. What's your sense on that?
Yeah, I do want to commend the Recwell staff. They have done a great job making activities and engagement virtually throughout this pandemic. And along with that, they also provided just a tremendous amount of in-person opportunities for folks that students really embraced and continue to do that. So that was one space they could continue to be around other people and do it in a safe manner. So kudos to them for all their effort around that. So yeah, we're going to continue to have some virtual programming. The demand is definitely for more in-person experiences, and we're pleased we're going to be able to do the majority of that, but there will still be some virtual programming, and as those details become available, they can be shared.
All right. I mean, I think we can all say one of the challenges that we are going to have to figure out how to navigate going into this year is how to do some of the virtual stuff while all the in-person stuff we're always expected to do, right? This is going to be one of the tensions that we're all going to have to figure out. You can't burn a candle at both ends for very long before you run out of candle. Just know if you're living with that, if you're sensing that, that is a conversation that you should be having in your department, and we should be elevating up through our areas and figuring out like what's the right balance, and you hold on to the stuff that was really good, but you can't be 100% virtual and 100% in person at the same time. It won't probably serve our students, very well.
Argyle, I would add probably that the UHS services, both clinical mental health services, we're still evaluating that, but there will be some of that made sense and worked really well virtually that will continue. So we're working through some of those details and understanding what the students want to support that better.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks. I think we are close to the end, but we have one question I want to throw out. And, so if anybody's out there in a virtual world and wants to get their last question, now's the time to type fast and we'll see if we can get it. But maybe I'll pitch this to Jake and to Carol is I've heard this term living with COVID. And I know that, is something that, we've is thrown out there, but I don't even know if I exactly know what it means to live with COVID and how you would paint a picture of what it means to now, like this becomes part of our life. It's not a one and done kind of situation. Thoughts from either of you about like, what's that mean for life going forward?
Yeah, Carol, I think did a nice job of talking about that initially earlier, but that is kind of our new norm. This is a new virus that we were having a lot of worries and issues with and difficulty controlling last year. But now we have a very effective strategy for dealing with that. So it's something that we will have to, have to adopt and incorporate it into our lives. We're not real clear yet about the needs for booster shots in the future, but right now the evidence suggests that it should be good for at least a year and perhaps even longer than that. But if for some reason a booster is appropriate, we will continue to support that and encourage people to consider doing it. What we do know is that the vaccine is incredibly effective and a way to protect yourself. Carol, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I would really just reiterate something that you've been saying and something that we've already said. If you think about COVID, or if you think about just life in general, we live in a reality where there is a long laundry list of viruses, right? Those are viruses that exist in our environment. They're communicable. We can pass them on to other people through the air or through surfaces or different things like that. And so for the last year, what's happened is that we live in this reality where we have this list of viruses and COVID exists, but it was heightened, right? Our awareness to that virus was raised. Living with COVID means that you have this long list of viruses, and now you have to take COVID and pull it down to exist within the laundry list of all the other viruses. Just like so many of those other viruses, we have a vaccine that we can use to protect us. And that's how we have to start thinking about living with COVID. We have something that we can use to protect us against it, knowing that COVID will more than likely always be there within the fabric of our existence. And so really thinking about what we need to do to not only protect ourselves and protect other people, but also live in this world where there's this virus that exists that once resulted in a global pandemic, but it's going to continue to linger there. Again, similar to what Jake said, we don't know if we'll need booster shots. We don't know what the third and the fourth season of COVID will look like. But what we do know is that getting the vaccine now will help us have a more secure future with regards to how we live in a world where COVID exists. I think Jake is talking.
Sorry about that. We relearned some really important lessons that our parents and others taught us, that were very effective. Let's keep those good habits that we readopted, or maybe we're more diligent about washing our hands, monitoring ourselves for sickness. If you're sick, stay home. Yeah. Don't share that. That'll fight the flu and COVID and many other viruses.
And that's the thing. I know many people on this call, the one thing I've heard from across student affairs and really across campus is, wow, we just made it through the best flu season ever. What that statement means is that no one had the flu, right? Why? you washed your hands, you had a mask on, and you stayed away from other people, especially those that were sick. And so these are public health recommendations that are there. They are helpful, not only to protect against COVID, but so many other things in the environment. And so I would definitely strongly encourage us to continue to do that. Even if it means the institution has to invest in more hand sanitizer and soap, I would definitely say continue to wash your hands, wear your mask, and stay away from people that are sick.
All right, well, given where we're at in our time, I want to say thanks to everyone who's online and who sent in those great questions, and thanks to the cabinet and Carol for being here and sharing of your knowledge. I want to turn it over now to Lori to do some closing remarks.
Great, thanks. And thanks to everybody again for joining us today, and for the team for all their hard work and putting this presentation together. So again, I want to acknowledge how hard this last year has been for all of us. The exhaustion, stress, trauma, loss have been tremendous. And we know it's going to take time to heal and to reconfigure our lives. And we must do this for ourselves, hopefully this summer, but we know that it may take longer than that for some of us. But we really need to rest and rejuvenate so that we can be ready to support our students for them when they return this fall. I also want to recognize that some of us have been on campus throughout the entire pandemic, while others have not been back in their office for over a year. I can remember doing a video in my basement when we first were all sent home, and how emotional and sad I was about, working in my basement for what I thought might be a month or two, and how difficult that was at that time. That was really traumatic. And so now we're kind of going back through another big change. And so again, some of us are eager to take off our masks and be back in person. And for some of us, it's going to take a little bit longer. I also really want to acknowledge the differential impact of the pandemic, or the instances of violence that some of our staff and students have experienced. We've done some good, important work with our DISJ goals this past year, and we will continue to make this a priority. But I was participating virtually in the NCORE conference earlier today, and I was just really re-energized again about how important this work is, and how hard and diligent we must be to address systemic racism and bias. We've set expectations for our student affairs operations this fall based on the belief that we are able to do our best work when we can meet students where they're at, and we're committed to carrying these out in a safe way. Thank you so much to everybody who have chosen to get vaccinated. Again, be sure, if you haven't, to upload your record to MyUHS. That information is all confidential, but it just helps us be able to communicate to the campus how many people on campus are vaccinated, and I think that gives a number of people some extra assurances. I also want to announce this summer that we're going to do monthly student affairs gatherings. It's just a casual, informal way to socialize with others across our organization. Total volunteer, optional, but I'm excited to share that our first one is going to be next Wednesday, June 16th, from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the Tripp Commons of the Memorial Union. So you'll get an email soon, and we'd love for you to RSVP. But I just hope you'll drop by, have a cup of coffee, maybe a pastry, and say hello. We really miss seeing everybody, and we're just looking forward to connecting again. So next Wednesday, 8 to 9 in the Tripp Commons. Would love to see you. If you're on campus or want to pop by, please do so. And then finally, please take time this summer to pause, to rest, and to rejuvenate, so that you can look forward and look ahead with renewed energy for the bright and busy road that awaits all of us.
All right, again, I want to say thanks, Dr. Reeser, the VCSA cabinet, Dr. Griggs, for all the information. Thanks for everybody who decided to join us today. It's a pleasure to be able to, be in community with you, even if it is virtually. And I hope you're feeling, better now hearing what we said today. If you're actually, feeling more tense, I am just going to ask you to breathe in and breathe out, and then go talk to someone, because this is not the end of the conversation. This is the start of the conversation. So go talk to your supervisor, go talk to your human resources representative about your questions and your concerns. There's also going to be a series of town halls that are coming this summer with some how-to videos to help people understand what it's going to mean to transition back together again on our campus. So let's watch for those town hall meetings for employees. I think is going to be one coming out on Monday, June 14th. You'll see some familiar faces from student affairs involved in those. Also, feel free to share this information with your colleagues, and to know that like if there's somebody who didn't get to see it, it will be available to them. We're going to have it in our next Student Affairs newsletter and other places so that somebody can go back and watch it again or watch it for the first time. With that, I'm going to close off our time today. I want to say take good care of yourselves, enjoy the summer, and on Wisconsin.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.